Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a review of a different kind of camera, and that is the one that has become pretty ubiquitous in modern usage, and that is what's found in a phone. Now, obviously, there is a lot of marketing hyperbole out there when it comes to the performance of phones in cameras. And I do get, as I've mentioned before, I get a variety of different kinds of solicitations of doing different kinds of reviews. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to take a flyer on one of these relatively inexpensive cameras that, tout high-end camera performance. And as a actual camera reviewer, I thought it'd be interesting to kind of run it through a similar kind of test as what I do actual cameras. And so what I found was interesting. So today I'm going to be reviewing the Doogee S61 Pro. Now this is as far as the basic specifications, this is a phone that runs Android 12. It's kind of a world phone in that you can get it, here in North America, Europe, Asia, around the world. And it is flexible in the sense that you can set it up to work with a variety of different bands and frequencies around the world. And so in that sense, it has great flexibility. It has the ability to drop 2 different SIM cards in there. And so it makes it interesting for travel. But the thing that was kind of, touted to me is that it's also touted as having a 48 megapixel main camera along with a additional 20 megapixel Sony night vision or infrared type camera. And then of course, a 16 megapixel front facing camera, so on and so forth, all of those things. So, okay, 48 megapixels, that's really close to my Sony Alpha 1 with 50 megapixels. And so I thought, well, let's see how they compare. And so today we're going to dive in and take a look at those kinds of things, and also a basic review of this actual phone when it comes to that performance. Because it turns out it does a lot of things other than camera a lot better than it does camera. More on that in just a moment. But again, going back to the basics here, for a phone that runs around 200 bucks, so I'll get that out of the way. This is a really inexpensive phone, not anywhere near the $1,000+ you might be looking at for the newest iPhone. This is a phone that can be gotten very inexpensively. So again, also makes it intriguing in that sense to those of you that don't want to, be paying a monthly payment that looks a lot like a car payment for your phone. But it does have a lot of appealing specs on it. It's got 6 gig of RAM, which means it can run multiple applications. It's got 128 gig, this particular model, of built-in storage space, but it's also expandable with a inexpensive micro SD type cards where you can get them up to 512 gig. And so lots of storage built in and a lot more potential storage. It is a USB Type-C charge port, and it runs off of a 5-volt or 2-amp charger system. And I will note that unlike a lot of the recent iPhones that I have gotten, it also actually comes with a charging brick, which has become an item that has been lost along the way in some recent phones. So let's break down quickly some of the basic phone usage, stuff that stood out to me as being positive, and then stuff that wasn't so positive. So first of all, it's been a long time since I've used anything Android. I've been using iPhone for years, and so I was actually really impressed by how far the process has come, for how intuitive it is to transfer from one operating system to another operating system, and that I was able to initiate a transfer by connecting cords between the 2 phones from my current phone to transfer basically everything over, and it was quite a seamless process. You still have to set some things up within apps, put in passwords, those kind of things. But it's not necessarily an S61 Pro specific thing, but I will say I'm impressed by how easy they've made the process to switch from one platform to another. And it gives me some hope just in case in the future I want to switch to an Android on a permanent basis. This is really a different approach to what I'm using. I actually, my phone right now is an iPhone SE Generation 2. So it's a by modern standards, it's a compact, slim body, and not as big of screen as what others. This is a different approach in that this is more similar to, for example, my son has, I believe, an iPhone 11, and it's much more similar in size to this in terms of the screen and the physical dimensions. Those physical dimensions are, this phone is 81 81 millimeters wide, 167 millimeters in length, and about 14.6 millimeters deep, and weighs in at 266 grams. So this is obviously heavier than what an iPhone, comparatively sized iPhone, because it is thicker. But I will note that it also comes basically with a built-in case, essentially, is how I look at it. It's much more protected when it comes to being waterproof and drop proof. It is can be submersible up to 1.5 meters and for up to 30 minutes. And so that's an IP68 and IP69K rating. So more waterproof. It is dust proof. I've been using it as a work phone, and it is really tough when it comes to resisting all of the work-related things. Doing lots of drywall right now. This thing has ended up covered in drywall dust fairly often, and is none the worse to wear for it. It is also drop-proof from 1.5 meters, again, making it a good, tough work-type phone, or if you're the kind of person that tends to drop their phone, well, this is a phone that actually seems to be up to handling that. The screen is nice and bright, I've noticed. It has a 6-inch IPS screen with a native resolution of 1440 by 720 pixels resolution, and so not bad there. And then the big thing that I think is just the best thing about using this particular phone is that the battery life is incredible on it. And again, I'm coming from an iPhone kind of standard, and the battery life here is just not even in the same ballpark. It has a 5,180 mAh sized battery, and it just goes and goes and goes. And here's a chart that shows, some of the typical usage, different things you can do. But I'll just give you kind of real world observations. I use this phone lightly on one day. This is something that just kind of comes to mind. I used it lightly on one day, checking email, some of the typical, basic browsing stuff. The next day, I used it at our work. We have a Bluetooth speaker system, and so we play music while we're working right now on the construction site. And so I started streaming the music from this. This has been killing my iPhone to where I get after 5 or 6 hours of streaming, I get to the end of the day and I'm like limping home with 10 to 20% of battery life. And so I used it all day. It didn't even hardly seem to phase it all that much. I used it the second day all day, and I used it a third day, and it continued to play on. And it wasn't until the end of that fourth day, 3 full days of music streaming, that I was finally getting towards low battery life. In fact, the first day that I used it, I had already used it the previous day lightly. The second day, I played music all day. It was at 64% battery life. My iPhone, which I didn't even use for music, was at 24% battery life at that point. And so it really is impressive. And another thing I've noticed is just when it's in standby and I'm not really using it much, the battery doesn't hardly drain at all. I mean, we're talking about a few percentage points a day, which is, again, is really unusual coming from iPhone kind of perspective. The other thing that's unique about this phone is that there are actually included 4 different rear plates that you can put on there. The basic design is kind of a clear design that lets you see some of the internal circuit boards. It's a cool look that I like. But you can also do a carbon fiber, a wood grain, kind of a blue, kind of metal type look. But all of those are user replaceable. And so in a sense, it kind of gives you some case options, different looks for the phone built right into it. So those are some of the things that I really like. Now, some of the things that I don't like so much is that I did note relative to my iPhone that the wireless is not as fast. And when I ran a speed test, I always got higher rates with my iPhone than what I got with this. I also noted that while it does have both on the side, the power button is also a fingerprint scanner ID, and it also has face recognition, that the face recognition and the fingerprint scanner, more so the face recognition, to a lesser degree the fingerprint scanner, is not really up to Apple success rate. And so it's kind of hit or miss whether or not the face recognition works. The fingerprint scanner does work more consistently, but there are certainly more situations where I'm lifting my finger multiple times to get the the result that I want. So that's not as good. The other thing is that, and something that really shocked me, is that when I got the phone and I was going through the settings, I was trying to increase the resolution for video, and I found that the maximum video option is only 1080p, and I thought that can't be right, so I looked it up, and sure enough it was. So there's a complaint there. Now, let's get to the main heart of this review when it comes to the actual performance, particularly of that main camera that is touted as being a 48 megapixel camera. Let's dive in and take a look if that is really the case. So the first thing to deal with is when it comes to the resolution on the S61 Pro. Unfortunately, there is some serious marketing that is going on here. So while if we look at this, everything seems appropriate. This is 48 megapixels of resolution in the JPEGs. But if I take a look at the JPEG and actually zoom into it all, we can see that it is really low resolution and really over sharpened. And so obviously this is not a native 48 megapixels. So interestingly, if I take a look at the RAW underneath there, and this RAW file's had a minor bit of processing here to give it, the look that I wanted. But if I go into a pixel level here, everything looks, fairly good. There's a good detail there. It's not over sharpened. It looks more like it should. And so if I take a look at what the RAW file is, it's actually at right around basically 4,000 by 3,000, which is a resolution of 12 megapixels. And so what you've actually got going on here is a upscaling that is taking place in camera to where that base resolution of 12 megapixels is being upscaled to the 48 megapixels of resolution. So I took that JPEG file into Photoshop, and here where you've got the TIFF file on the left, I actually reduced the resolution down to the same resolution as what I showed you on the RAW file. And what you can see here is that at that level of resolution, you're actually getting the appropriate, there's nice sharpening and detail there, but it's not over sharpened. It looks appropriate, whereas this obviously has been upscaled somewhat disastrously when you're looking at it on a high resolution monitor. In this case, we're looking at it on a 4K monitor. So that resolution is actually very similar to what I'm getting on my current phone, which is an iPhone SE second generation. And so that's a fairly recent phone within the last year and a half or so. But its camera is right around that same resolution, just a tiny bit higher. But if I look at the RAW file that I'm able to get off of the S61 and I compare it to this JPEG, in many ways the file off of the S61 actually compares favorably. It has a little bit more detail there and a little bit more nuance to the image, but that's because we're dealing with the native resolution of the camera, which in this case matches up fairly well. The iPhone is registering as just a hair over 12 megapixels, 4032 by 3024. Now, if I look at the JPEG file off of the S61 Pro, it shows that higher resolution. But anyway, once again, going back to comparing these two, while that's a much larger looking image, you can see that it's really just been upscaled, and there's not enough resolution there to compare favorably at all to the iPhone's picture. But we can see that at the base resolution, that RAW file actually does quite well in comparison. So unfortunately, the marketing, 12 megapixels doesn't market the way that 48 megapixels does. And frankly, I think that they could have probably even upscaled it to 24 megapixels and had a much more reasonable end result. So with that in mind, if we look at my test chart at 100% magnification, you can see that it's basically a mess. There's just everything is smeared as far as the textures. But if I look at it in the RAW format, while the resolution is obviously quite low here, you can see that we don't have any of that artificial sharpening. So we'll take a look at it at 200% like I typically show. At 200% magnification, you can see that there is some usable resolution there. It's not, up to the standard of what I would see typically, but you can see my test chart. You are able to make things out, and, the camera performance is fairly consistent across the frame. There's some decent resolution that goes right over to the edge of the frame. Contrast, not off the charts here, but overall, there is a usable amount of information that is here, though not at a particularly high resolution. Now, when it comes to the RAW files, you'll note that the color profile is fairly flat right out of the camera. Now, that's not a bad thing in that with a RAW file, you want some flexibility, but they are a little bit flatter than what I see coming off of a modern camera. You can see the detail there is nice, though, and you could, add a little bit more sharpening if you so desired. In this case, I have processed the taste, and you can see that, I've been able to, add some color pop to the image and make it a far more visually appealing one than the rather flat RAW file. So moving beyond the marketing into actually looking at the reality, here, these are some images raw images that I have edited out of the phone. And you can see that when you're shooting in this RAW, that I'm actually getting some nice looking images. Obviously, I have processed to taste here, but the fact that it's an actual RAW file gives me the ability to do that. Here's another here where, I've been able to process to taste, and as I kind of scan throughout the image, it's not super high resolution, obviously, but the detail there is nice. There is very workable resolution there for different applications. I mean, this is big enough that it would print nicely for a lot of things. And so for me, I would always still shoot in RAW on this particular phone/camera because while it's not high resolution, this is an actual useful file with lots of detail. You can see some decent dynamic range there, whereas the JPEG files I would consider to be unusable because of all of that upscaling that's already being done. And so if you start to downsample, you're just ending up with a compromised image to begin with. So I prefer to start with the RAW file where I can process to taste, as I have done in these images here. Now, a few of the other features there, which are kind of akin to, for example, this in portrait mode is much like what Apple has done recently with iPhones, in that it's basically creating an artificial bokeh. It's sampling what it considers to be the subject, leaving them in focus while defocusing everything else to create an electronic bokeh. It works reasonably well if you're not really a photographer, but in this case, I think it's a little cruder than what Apple has been able to accomplish. The other thing that's being touted here is that there is a separate infrared camera, and so it does have some useful application, though frankly only if you're really interested in this kind of thing. So in very low light situations, yes, you're going to be able to use that infrared. For example, here, this was a completely dark room, and you can see that the infrared has, it's been able to pull up details. And so it does allow you to use this as a little bit of like a night vision situation, but it may have limited real world applications unless you're really in a situation where, you need a photo that's, frankly not all that high resolution, but I guess enough to allow you to see into a messy utility room in the dark. So as you can see, what we end up with is a bit of a mixed bag from a camera perspective. I'm really not a fan of that upscaling in camera, and I recognize why they're doing it because of the marketing potential of that. But as an actual photographer, that really diminishes the end product, and that I find the JPEGs are less useful than those out of my iPhone, even though they both have basically the same native resolution, and the actual files that this is able to produce can be quite good. But the problem is that because it's already been upscaled so much in camera, it means that by the time you start to reverse that process in a JPEG, you're going to end up with a diminished rather than an enhanced result. I really do appreciate the fact that I can get at and use RAW files here and have more manual controls than what I can on an iPhone. So that's good. But I really, really wish that I could just rely on the basic JPEGs more, because the RAW files do come out of the camera quite flat. And so they definitely need processing to get them to look kind of the way that you might expect them to, even though I appreciate the fact that there is a lot of workability there. Bottom line is that I actually really, really enjoy the phone. There's things that I really love it for. I love it for music streaming. Same would be true for video streaming. I love it as a source to play my Audible books because that battery life, it just goes on and on and on. And I've used it in the morning. I've been using it a lot for checking my email because it's, intuitive. Things work nice. It has a nice size screen. And so I prefer it for that task, for example, than I do my iPhone. And so there's things about it as a phone that I actually really, really like. The camera is only so-so out of that. And I think that unfortunately, in the interest of marketing, which is something that I think happens quite often, to be frank, in the camera phone world, is that in the pursuit of that, marketing point, they've actually given you a less usable result than if they actually just worked with the native resolution of the camera. And so that's one mark certainly against this phone. At the end of the day, though, this is a lot of phone for $200. I really like the toughness of it. I think it'd be a great work phone. And if you're someone that does a lot of streaming and you want to use it for that, the battery life is truly amazing on this. The high amount of storage is great. So many things that I really like about it. But oddly enough, the camera is not particularly one of them. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you're interested in learning more about the Doogee S61 Pro, you can take a look in the description down below where I've got links to where some places you can purchase it from. And also link is there to follow myself or Craig on social media, to check out our collaborative channel, Let the Light In TV. You can get channel merchandise, you can become a patron, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.